7-year-old little Johnny just didn't have the strength anymore to lift his head from the pillow. 14 doctors, 47 tests, 8 months of agony, and none of them could tell Grandpa what was slowly killing his only grandson. Until a 67-year-old housekeeper looked in the one place that no one else had bothered to check: under the bed. What she found there would change everything, but before I tell you what it was, you need to understand how we got to this point, because this story doesn't begin with a mysterious illness. It begins with a man who believed that money could buy anything, including his grandson's life. Richard Miller was 62 years old when he received the call. That shattered his world. It was a Tuesday morning. He was in his office on the 43rd floor, reviewing contracts for a multi-million-dollar construction project, when his secretary knocked on the door with an expression he'd never seen before. "Mr. Miller, it's the hospital." At that moment, Richard still didn't know that his life was about to be split in two, before that call and after. His only daughter, Michelle, 34 years old, had died in a car accident on her way to pick up her son from school. The boy was with her. Little Johnny, 6 years old at the time, survived with barely a scratch. A miracle, the doctors said. The seatbelt and child seat saved him. But what no doctor could predict was that this miracle had an expiration date. If you're listening to this and you think money doesn't matter, let me tell you something about Richard Miller. He owned one of the largest construction companies in the country. His fortune was estimated in the hundreds of millions. He lived in a 23-room mansion. He owned 7 luxury cars. He could buy practically anything that existed in this world. And yet, when his daughter died, he discovered that there was something that all his money couldn't buy. He couldn't buy back the time he never spent with her. He couldn't buy back the calls he never answered because he was in meetings. He couldn't buy back the birthdays he missed because he had business trips. He couldn't buy back the last conversation they never had because he was too busy being rich. Michelle died without knowing how much her father loved her because Richard never told her. After the funeral, Richard made a decision. That surprised everyone who knew him. He resigned as CEO of his company. First, he delegated everything to his partners, and he dedicated himself completely to taking care of his grandson. Little Johnny was the only thing he had left of Michelle. It was his second chance, his way of making up for all the years. He wasn't there for his daughter. This time would be different. Richard swore to himself. This time, he would be there. This time, he wouldn't let anything or anyone take his family away from him. What he didn't know was that the enemy that threatened little Johnny wasn't something he could see. It wasn't something he could fight with money. It wasn't something that any doctor in the world could identify. The enemy was hidden in the most unexpected place. The first 6 months after the accident were difficult but hopeful. Little Johnny missed his mum. He had nightmares. Sometimes he cried for no apparent reason. The therapists said it was normal. Grief in children can manifest in many ways. Richard hired the best therapists, the best child psychologists, the best nannies. He surrounded little Johnny with all the love and attention that money could buy, and it worked, little by little. Little Johnny started to smile again. He started to play. He started to talk about his mom without crying. He started to call Richard Grandpa instead of Mr., like he did before. Richard felt like he was doing something right for the first time in his life. But then came the day that changed everything. It was a Monday in April. Richard remembers it perfectly because it was the day he decided to move little Johnny into the special room. The special room was the biggest room in the mansion, after Richard's own. It had a view of the garden. It had its own bathroom. It had space for all the toys a child could ever want. Richard had spent over $100,000 remodeling it specifically for little Johnny. A bed imported from Italy, an orthopedic mattress of the best brand, Persian rugs, silk curtains, custom-made furniture. All the best for his grandson. What Richard didn't know was that under that imported bed, under those Persian rugs, under that hardwood floor, that cost a fortune, there was something that no amount of money in the world could detect, something that had been growing for years, something that was waiting. The first few weeks in the new room were perfect. Little Johnny loved his new room. He loved the view. He loved the space. He loved having his own bathroom, like the grown-ups. Richard felt proud. He was finally doing something right, as a grandfather. But then, exactly 3 weeks later, little Johnny woke up one morning, saying his head hurt. Richard didn't think much of it. Kids complain about headaches all the time. He gave him some children's pain reliever and sent him to breakfast the next day. Little Johnny didn't want to eat breakfast. He said his stomach hurt. On the third day, the nanny found him asleep at 3 in the afternoon, something that had never happened before. Little Johnny was a hyperactive kid who hated naps. On the 4th day, Richard noticed something. That chilled him to the bone. Little Johnny's lips were turning blue. He called the doctor immediately. The first doctor arrived. In less than an hour, he was a renowned pediatrician. He had treated the children of presidents and CEOs. He charged $5,000 for a house call. He examined little Johnny for 40 minutes. He asked him questions. He took his temperature. He checked his throat, his ears, his eyes, finally. He took off his stethoscope and looked at Richard. "Mr. Miller, your grandson has a mild respiratory infection. Nothing serious. Now, I'll prescribe antibiotics, and in a week, he'll be as good as new." Richard breathed a sigh of relief. It was just an infection. Kids get sick all the time, and it was nothing. But a week later, little Johnny wasn't as good as new. He was worse. The second doctor was a specialist in infectious diseases. 3 days of tests, blood samples, cultures, X-rays. Result: negative for any known infection. The third doctor was an allergist. Little Johnny must be allergic to something. That would explain the respiratory symptom, the fatigue, the confusion. 2 weeks of tests. Hundreds of allergens analyzed. Result: little Johnny wasn't allergic to anything. The fourth doctor was a neurologist. Maybe there was something in his brain, and maybe the accident had left after effects that weren't showing up until now. MRI, electroencephalogram, a CAT scan. The result? Little Johnny's brain was perfectly normal. The fifth doctor, the sixth, the seventh, each with their own theory, each with their own tests, each with their own bills for thousands of dollars, and none with an answer. If you're feeling frustrated right now, if you're feeling helpless, imagine multiplying that by 1,000. That's what Richard Miller felt every morning when he walked into his grandson's room and saw him weaker than the day before. Little Johnny, who 6 months ago was running around the yard, could now barely walk to the bathroom. Little Johnny, who 6 months ago talked non-stop, now barely whispered. Little Johnny, who 6 months ago was a child full of life, now seemed like a ghost of himself, and nobody knew why. The eighth doctor was the one who spoke the words that Richard Miller feared the most. "Mr. Miller, we've exhausted all conventional diagnostic options. Your grandson's symptoms don't match any known disease. My recommendation is that you consider alternative medicine options." Richard Miller stared at him, unbelieving. "Alternative medicine? Are you telling me to abandon my grandson to witch doctors and charlatans because you, the real doctors, can't do anything?" The doctor lowered his gaze. I'm telling you that we've reached the limit of what medicine can offer in this case. Richard Miller threw him out of his house. And that night, for the first time in his life, he cried himself to sleep. The following months were hell. Richard Miller hired doctors from Germany, from Japan, from the United States. The best specialists in the world flew to his mansion to examine little Johnny. 14 doctors in total. 47 different tests. Diagnoses ranging from anemia to depression, from allergies to psychosomatic problems. Treatments ranging from vitamins to antidepressants, from respiratory therapies to dietary changes. Nothing worked. Each day. Little Johnny was a little weaker. Each day. Little Johnny was a little further away. Each day. Richard Miller felt like he was losing the only person he had left in the world. And then she arrived. The previous nanny had quit last week. She couldn't take it anymore, she told Richard Miller with tears in her eyes. She couldn't watch the boy deteriorate day after day without being able to do anything. It was too much for her. Richard Miller understood. He didn't blame her. In fact, he himself had thought about giving up more than once. But he couldn't. Little Johnny was all he had. The domestic employee agency sent him a resume that afternoon. Michelle Johnson, 67 years old. Experience 40 years in domestic work. Impeccable references. Richard Miller barely read it. He didn't care who cleaned his house. He just needed someone to keep the place running while he dedicated every minute to finding a cure for his grandson. Hire her, he told his assistant. He didn't even interview her. That was his first mistake. Or maybe it was his greatest stroke of luck. Michelle arrived on a Monday morning. She was a large woman, not fat, but large. One of those women who take up space in the world, not because of the size of their body, but because of the presence of their soul. Skin as dark as night, white hair pulled back in a tight bun, eyes that seemed to see more than they showed. She carried a small suitcase with her belongings, a worn blue uniform, and something else that no one noticed at first. She brought the experience of having seen more pain than any doctor would ever see in their life. "Good morning," she said in a quiet voice. "I'm Michelle, but you can call me Shelley." The butler led her to her room in the service area. He explained the rules of the house. He showed her where the cleaning supplies were, and he warned her about the boy. "The master's grandson is very sick. No one knows what he has. The doctors can't do anything, so don't get too close to him. We don't want him to get upset." Michelle nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on the door to little Johnny's room. The first day, Michelle cleaned the kitchen. The second day, she cleaned the bathrooms. The third day, it was her turn to clean little Johnny's room. And that's when everything changed. It was 9 in the morning when Michelle first entered the special room. Little Johnny was lying in his imported bed, covered with silk sheets, surrounded by toys he didn't have the strength to touch. The boy barely looked at her when she entered. "Good morning," Michelle said softly. "I'm here to clean. I won't bother you." Little Johnny didn't respond. He just closed his eyes. Michelle began to clean. Slow. Methodical. As she had cleaned thousands of rooms in her life. But while her hands worked, her eyes observed. They observed the pale child in the bed. They observed the color of his lips. They observed the way he breathed. They observed everything. And that's when she noticed something that made her stop. The smell. It was a smell that shouldn't be there. Damp. Earthy. Almost imperceptible. But for someone who had spent 40 years cleaning houses, it was unmistakable. Michelle had cleaned mansions and shacks. She had cleaned hospitals and schools. She had cleaned houses where there had been floods, abandoned houses, houses where moisture had destroyed everything. And she knew that smell. It was the smell of mold. But that didn't make sense. This room was new. It had been remodeled less than a year ago. The materials were of the best quality. There shouldn't be any mold here. Michelle stood still for a moment. sniffing the air like a dog that detects something that humans can't perceive. The smell was coming from somewhere. She was sure of it. But she decided not to say anything. Not yet. She was just a housekeeper, an old black and heavy-set woman who cleaned floors. No one would pay attention to her if she said she smelled something strange in the sick boy's room. So she kept cleaning and kept observing. That night, Michelle couldn't sleep. Lying in her small bed in the service area, she thought about the boy in the special room. She thought about his bluish lips. She thought about his weak breathing. She thought about that smell that no one else seemed to notice. And she thought about her own grandson, Michael. He was 5 years old when he died. He had also been weak. He had also had symptoms that no one could explain. He had also gone through doctors who couldn't find anything, until it was too late. The diagnosis came 3 days after the funeral: lead poisoning. The old pipes in the house where they lived had been poisoning little Johnny for months. Years, maybe. Slowly. Silently. And no one had seen it. Not the doctors with their fancy degrees. Not the specialists with all their equipment. No one. Michelle never forgave herself for not noticing sooner, for not seeing the signs, for not trusting her grandma instincts that told her something was wrong. Little Johnny died 22 years ago. And every day since then, Michelle had promised herself that she would never again ignore what her eyes saw, what her nose smelled, what her gut told her, even if nobody listened, even if she was just a housekeeper, even if she was just an old, black and heavy woman who cleaned floors. The next morning, Michelle arrived early at little Johnny's room, not to clean, to observe. She stood in the doorway and watched the boy sleep. She counted his breaths, 12 per minute, too slow for a child his age. She noticed the color of his skin, grayish, with a bluish tinge around his mouth, as if he wasn't getting enough oxygen. She noticed how he moved, slow, heavy, as if every movement took an enormous effort. And she noticed something else. The smell was stronger in the morning. After the boy had spent all night in that room, the odor was definitely more intense. Michelle felt a chill run down her spine. She knew this pattern. She had seen it before. For the next 3 days, Michelle did something that no doctor had done in 8 months of tests and consultations. She observed, not with million-dollar equipment, not with blood tests, not with MRIs, just with her eyes and her ears, her nose. And she discovered something that would change everything. Little Johnny was always worse in the mornings. When he had just spent 8 or 10 hours in his room, little Johnny always got a little better when he left the room. When they took him to the garden, when he went to the hospital for tests, when he spent time in other parts of the house. And little Johnny always got worse again when he returned to his room. The pattern was clear, so clear that Michelle couldn't understand how nobody else had noticed it. Or maybe they had noticed it, but nobody had connected the dots, because nobody had thought that the enemy could be hidden in the safest place in the house, in the special room, in the imported bed, beneath all that luxury. And Michelle knew she had to say something, but she also knew that nobody would listen to her. She was just a housekeeper, a woman without much education, an old woman who cleaned floors. What would she know about diseases that 14 doctors hadn't been able to diagnose? But then she remembered Matthias. She remembered how she had kept silent when her gut told her that something was wrong. She remembered how she had trusted the doctors instead of trusting herself. She remembered how she had lost her grandson because she was afraid to speak. She wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. That afternoon, Michelle waited for Richard Miller to come down to the living room. She approached him with her head lowered, as housekeepers approached their employers. "Mr. Miller, excuse me for bothering you, but I need to tell you something about your grandson." Richard Miller looked at her with a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Who are you?" "I'm Michelle, the new housekeeper. I've been cleaning your house for a week." Richard Miller nodded distractedly. "Oh yes. What do you need?" Michelle took a deep breath. "Sir, I think I know what's making your grandson sick." Richard Miller stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at her intently for the first time. A woman of 67 years, black, heavy, wearing a worn blue uniform, a housekeeper who had been in his house for a week. And this woman was telling him that she knew what 14 doctors from around the world hadn't been able to discover. Richard Miller almost laughed, but he didn't, because something in Michelle's eyes made him hesitate, something that looked like knowledge, something that looked like certainty, something that looked like the truth. "I'm listening," Richard Miller said. And Michelle told him everything. The musty smell she detected in the room, the pattern she had observed, how little Johnny got worse after spending time in his room and improved when he left, how everything had started right when he was moved to that special room. Richard Miller listened to her in silence, and when she finished, he shook his head. That room was remodeled less than a year ago. The best materials, the best builders. There's no way there's mold in there. Sir, I know what I smell, and I smell mold. Richard Miller looked at her with a mixture of pity and frustration. "Look, Michelle, I appreciate your concern, but I've spent millions of dollars on the best doctors in the world. I've done 47 tests, and none of them has mentioned anything about mold or humidity or anything like that, because none of them has been cleaning houses for 40 years like I have." Richard Miller sighed. "Just clean the house, and that's what I hired you for." And he left. Michelle was left alone in the living room, with her words ignored, with her knowledge dismissed, with the certainty that something was killing that boy, and with the determination to prove it, even if nobody wanted to listen to her. From that moment on, Michelle began a silent investigation. Every time she cleaned little Johnny's room, she searched, she smelled, she observed. The smell was stronger near the bed. Of that she was sure. But she couldn't see anything. The sheets were clean. The mattress was new. The floor looked impeccable. The problem was hidden, beneath something. Michelle knew she had to look under the bed, but she couldn't do it with the child there. She couldn't move a bed that cost thousands of dollars without someone asking what she was doing. She needed the perfect moment, and that moment arrived 5 days later. It was Thursday. Richard Miller had taken little Johnny to the hospital for another round of tests. The house was empty. Michelle had 3 hours before they returned. She entered the special room. She closed the door. She knelt beside the imported bed from Italy, and she looked underneath. What she saw froze her blood. Mold. Not a little bit of mold. Not a small stain that could be cleaned with bleach. It was an entire colony of black mold that covered almost the entire wooden floor under the bed. Michelle stood paralyzed for a moment, looking at that dark, damp mass that spread like a living shadow under the most expensive piece of furniture in the room. The mold had grown in silence, for months, maybe years, feeding on the moisture that came from somewhere, reproducing, spreading, releasing its microscopic spores into the air of the room. And little Johnny was sleeping right above it, 8 hours every night, sometimes more during the day when he was too weak to get up, breathing in those spores, day after day, week after week, month after month. The housekeeper, Michelle, knew exactly what she was looking at. Not because she had a medical degree, not because she had studied biology, but because she'd cleaned enough old houses, enough flooded basements, enough places where dampness took over everything. Black mold, Stachybotrys, the most toxic of all. Its spores attacked the respiratory system, caused fatigue, mental confusion, headaches, muscle weakness, memory problems, exactly the symptoms little Johnny had. Michelle rose from the floor, her knees trembling. Now she had to prove it. She pulled her old cell phone from her uniform pocket. It was an outdated device with a poor quality camera, but it was enough. She knelt again and took photo. 5, 6, 7 photos of the black mold hiding under the sick boy's bed. Then she stood up. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to find Richard. She found him in his office, reviewing papers with a defeated expression. "Mr. Miller." Richard looked up. "What do you want now, Michelle?" "I know what's making your grandson sick." Richard sighed. "We've already talked about this. There's no mold in that room." "Yes, there is, and I have pictures." Richard paused for a moment. "What?" Michelle held out her old cell phone, displaying the photos on the screen. "Look, this is under little Johnny's bed. Black mold, the most toxic kind. It's been growing there for months, maybe since before he was moved to that room." Richard took the phone and looked at the photos. His expression shifted from disbelief to shock. "This can't be. That room was remodeled less than a year ago. There was some kind of moisture problem before the remodeling, some leak, some water damage." Richard thought for a moment. There was a flood in that part of the house 3 years ago, a broken pipe. But we repaired everything. The contractors assured us that. "The contractors told you what you wanted to hear, sir. But mold doesn't just disappear because someone puts new flooring on top of it. It hides, it waits, and it grows." Richard looked at the photos again, then he looked at Michelle. And then he did something she didn't expect. He laughed. "Michelle, please. I understand you want to help, but these photos don't prove anything. It could be dirt. It could be a stain. I'm not an expert, but neither are you. Sir, I've been cleaning houses for 40 years. I know mold when I see it, and I've paid 14 of the best doctors in the world to examine my grandson. If there was something in his room that was making him sick, they would have found it. Doctors look for diseases inside the body. I'm saying the disease is outside, in the air he's breathing." Richard handed her back the phone. "I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I need you to concentrate on your work. Clean the house. That's what I pay you to do. Sir, your grandson is dying." The words came out of Michelle's mouth with a force that surprised them both. Richard turned pale. "How dare you?" "I dare because I've seen this before. I saw a child die because nobody listened to the person who was seeing the signs." "What are you talking about?" "My grandson, sir. My grandson, Matthew. He died 22 years ago. He had the same symptoms as little Johnny, and no doctor could diagnose him." Richard stared at her. "What did he have?" "Lead poisoning. He was being poisoned by the pipes in our old house, slowly, day after day, and nobody saw it until it was too late." Richard was silent for a moment. Then he spoke in a cold voice. "I'm sorry about your grandson, I really am. But this situation has nothing to do with that. My grandson is being treated by the best doctors in the world. If there was something in his room that was making him sick, they would have detected it. Doctors don't look under the beds, sir. They just look at the tests. This conversation is over." Richard turned away. Michelle didn't move. "Sir, please, just have someone check that room. Just that. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to verify." Richard glanced at her over his shoulder. "You know what, Michelle? You're right. I don't believe you. And I'm not going to waste my time verifying theories from a housekeeper who's been in my house for a week. But sir, mention this subject again, and you're fired." He left the office, and Michelle was alone again. With the photos on her phone, with the certainty of what she had seen, and with the weight of knowing that nobody was going to listen to her. That night, Michelle did something she hadn't done in years. She prayed. She knelt beside her bed in the small servants' quarters and spoke to God as if he were an old friend she hadn't seen in a while. "Lord, you know I'm not perfect. You know I've made mistakes. You know I couldn't save my grandson when I should have." Tears began to fall. "But this child, Lord, this child doesn't have to die. The answer is right there under that bed. I saw it. I photographed it. But nobody believes me." She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her nightgown. "Give me a sign, Lord. Tell me what I should do. Because if I stay silent, this child is going to die. But if I keep speaking, I'm going to be fired. And if I get fired, I won't be able to help him." She was silent for a moment. Then she added something more. "And if it has to be that way, Lord, if I have to be fired for the truth to come out, then let me be fired. But let the boy be saved. Because he's 7 years old and he has his whole life ahead of him. And I'm 67 and I've already lived everything I had to live." She rose from the floor with difficulty. Her old knees protested. But her decision was made. Tomorrow she was going to do something drastic. The next morning, Michelle didn't go to clean. She went directly to little Johnny's room. The boy was awake, but barely. His eyes moved slowly, as if even looking took effort. "Good morning," Michelle whispered, sitting in the chair beside his bed. Little Johnny looked at her. "Good morning," he said in a voice so weak it was barely audible. "How are you feeling today?" The boy closed his eyes. "Tired. Always tired." Michelle felt her heart break. "Tell me something. Do you feel different when you leave this room? When you go to the garden, or the hospital, or other parts of the house?" Little Johnny opened his eyes. "Yeah. How different? Better. I can breathe better. My head doesn't hurt as much. And when you come back here..." Little Johnny took a moment to answer. "Worse. Always worse." Grandma Benedita nodded. "Thank you, sweetheart. Thank you for telling me that." "Why do you ask?" "Because I think I know why you're sick, and I think I can help you." Little Johnny looked at her with something Grandma Benedita hadn't seen in his eyes since she arrived. "Hope? Really? Really? The doctors couldn't." "I know. But sometimes, my love, the answer isn't in the books or the tests. Sometimes the answer is closer than we think." At that moment, the door to the room opened. Richard Miller walked in and saw Grandma Benedita sitting next to his grandson. His expression changed immediately. "What are you doing here?" "Just talking to little Johnny, sir." "I told you to stay away from him." Grandma Benedita stood up slowly. "Sir, your grandson just confirmed what I told you yesterday. He feels worse when he's in this room and better when he leaves." Richard Miller approached, his face contorted with fury. "Enough. You're fired." "Sir, please." "Fired. Pack your things and get out of my house. Now." Grandma Benedita looked directly at him. And then she made a decision that would change everything. "Very well, sir. I'll leave." She headed towards the door, but before leaving, she stopped. She turned around and said something Richard Miller would never forget. "Mr. Miller, I already lost a grandson because I didn't speak up when I should have. I'm not going to stay silent again." She extended her cell phone towards him. "Here are the photos of the mold that's killing little Johnny. I'm going to leave this phone on your table. When your grandson gets worse, and he will get worse, look at the photos, and then look under the bed." Richard Miller didn't move. "And when you do, sir, don't look for me to ask for forgiveness. Look for me to tell me that little Johnny was saved. That's the only thing that matters to me." Grandma Benedita left the cell phone on the nightstand next to little Johnny's bed. Then she looked at the boy. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart. Someone's going to look at you soon. Really look at you." And she left the room. Half an hour later, Grandma Benedita was leaving the mansion with her small suitcase. The butler had paid her for her week's work. He had apologized in a low voice, as if afraid someone would hear him. He had said that he thought what was happening was unfair, but he hadn't done anything to stop it. Nobody had done anything. Grandma Benedita walked to the nearest bus stop. While she waited, she thought about little Johnny. She thought about his pale little face. She thought about his eyes filled with hope when she told him that she knew what was wrong. She thought about the probability that Richard Miller would never look at the photos. She thought about the probability that this boy would die because of the pride of a man who couldn't accept that a housekeeper knew more than 14 doctors. Tears began to fall, but Grandma Benedita didn't wipe them away. She let them run. Because sometimes tears are the only way to release the weight of knowing that you did everything you could. and that it wasn't enough. 2 days passed. Grandma Benedita was in her small apartment on the other side of town, trying not to think about little Johnny. She had called some friends who worked in the homes of wealthy families. She had told them about the mold. She had asked them that if anyone knew someone who knew Richard Miller, to tell him what she had discovered. But nobody had paid attention to her. A housekeeper saying she knows more than the doctors? Sounds like crazy talk. I'm just asking you to check. To look under the bed. Oh, Benny, stop worrying about the problems of the rich, and they have money to solve them. But this boy is going to die. Rich kids don't die, Benny. Ours do. Grandma Benedita hung up the phone with a broken heart. Her friend was right. Rich kids didn't die. They had doctors, hospitals, treatments, everything that money could buy. But money couldn't buy what little Johnny needed. Little Johnny needed someone to look under his bed, and nobody was going to do it. On the third night after being fired, Grandma Benedita dreamed of her grandson, Matthew. In the dream, Matthew was 5 years old like when he died. But he wasn't sick. He was smiling, running through a field of flowers that didn't exist anywhere Grandma Benedita knew. "Grandma," Matthew shouted, "come play with me." Grandma Benedita ran towards him, but the more she ran, the farther away Matthew was. "I can't reach you," she shouted. "You don't have to reach me, Grandma. You have to reach the other boy." "What other boy?" Matthew pointed towards somewhere behind Grandma Benedita. "That one. The one who still has time." Grandma Benedita turned around and saw little Johnny, standing alone in the middle of the field, pale, weak, with bluish lips. "Help me," the boy whispered. Grandma Benedita woke up screaming. The next morning, Grandma Benedita did something she hadn't done in her entire life. She called the police. She explained the situation to the operator. She said that there was a boy getting sick in a mansion, that there was toxic mold in his room, that the father refused to check. The operator listened to her patiently and then told her that they couldn't do anything. "Mom, what you're describing isn't a crime. If the boy's father doesn't want to check his room, that's his decision. But the boy is dying. He's being treated by doctors. The doctors haven't found anything." "Then maybe there's nothing to find. There's mold under his bed and I saw it. I photographed it." The operator sighed. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you say you're a housekeeper. You're not a doctor. You're not a health inspector. You have no authority to diagnose anything. I'm just asking for someone to check. We can't enter private property without a warrant. And we can't get a warrant based on the theories of a fired housekeeper." Grandma Benedita hung up the phone. She sat in silence for a long time, and then she understood something terrible. Nobody was going to help her. Not the police, not the doctors, not the friends. Nobody. Little Johnny was alone. And the only person who knew what was killing him was a fat old black woman whom nobody listened to. On the fourth night, Grandma Benedita couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her small apartment, looking at the city lights. Somewhere in that city, little Johnny was lying in his thousands of dollars bed, breathing toxic spores, weakening with each passing hour. And there was nothing she could do. Or was there? There was something. Something she had discarded because it seemed impossible. But desperate times call for desperate measures. At 6 in the morning on the 5th day, Bernadette stood before the doors of the city's most prestigious hospital, not as a patient, not as a visitor, but as someone who possessed information. That could save a life. She spent 3 hours waiting until she finally managed to speak with a doctor. She told him everything about little Johnny's illness. The 14 doctors who hadn't found anything, the black mold beneath the bed, the pattern of symptoms, that matched mycotoxin poisoning. The doctor listened to her with a skeptical expression. When she finished, he asked something Bernadette didn't expect. "Do you have the photos?" "Yes." "I mean, no. I left them with the boy's grandpa. on my cell phone. So, you don't have any proof? I have my word. The doctor sighed. Ma'am, every week, someone comes here with theories about illnesses that doctors can't diagnose. Every week, someone believes they've discovered something we haven't seen. And every week, I have to explain to them that medicine doesn't work like that. Doctor, I know what I saw. What you saw could be many things. It could be dirt, it could be a stain, it could be common mold. That poses no danger. It was black mold. I recognized it. Are you a fungal expert? I'm an expert at cleaning houses, and in those houses, I've seen everything. The doctor shook his head. I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't intervene in the case of a patient who isn't mine, based on the testimony of someone without medical credentials. Doctor, that child is going to die. If the 14 doctors who have examined him haven't found anything, then there probably isn't anything to find. Or they're probably looking in the wrong place. The doctor looked at her with something that might have been pity. I'm sorry, ma'am, I can't help you. And he closed his office door. Bernadette stood in the hospital hallway, alone, ignored, dismissed. As always, as her entire life. That night, Bernadette arrived at her apartment and collapsed onto her old armchair. She had no more options. She had tried everything. She had spoken with Richard. He had thrown her out. She had called the police. They couldn't do anything. She had gone to the hospital. No one listened. What more could a 67-year-old woman do? With no money, no power, no credentials, nothing. She couldn't do anything. Little Johnny was going to die, and she was going to have to live with that, like she lived with the death of Matthew, like she lived with all the failures of her life, like she lived with the certainty that, in this world, people like her simply don't matter. She closed her eyes and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for. A miracle, perhaps, a sign, something that would tell her that not all was lost. And then, at 11 o'clock at night, on the 7th day after being fired, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Bernadette answered. Hello? On the other end of the line, a male voice that she recognized immediately. Bernadette, it's Richard Miller. You were right. Please come. My grandson is dying. Bernadette didn't ask what had happened. She didn't ask why Richard had changed his mind. She didn't ask anything. She only said 4 words. I'm on my way. She hung up the phone, put on the first dress she found EQ, and ran out into the street to find a cab. The trip from her small apartment to Richard's mansion normally took 40 minutes. That night, Bernadette did it in 20. The taxi driver looked at her in the rearview mirror with concern when she asked him to speed up. But when he saw the tears in her eyes, he asked no questions and he just pressed on the accelerator. As the taxi sped through the empty city streets, Bernadette prayed in silence, Please, Lord, please, let it not be too late. Let the boy still have time. Let him be saved. She asked nothing for herself. She asked for no recognition, no apologies, and no justice. She only asked that little Johnny live. That was all that mattered to her. When the taxi arrived at the mansion, the lights in all the windows were on. There was an ambulance parked in the driveway, and Richard was standing at the door, his face haggard, and his eyes red from crying. When he saw Bernadette get out of the taxi, he ran toward her. What he did next left her speechless. He knelt before her. On the ground, a 62-year-old millionaire kneeling before a 67-year-old housekeeper. Forgive me, he said, his voice breaking. Please forgive me. You were right. You were right about everything. Bernadette took him by the shoulders and helped him to his feet. There's nothing to forgive, sir. Just tell me, What happened with little Johnny? Richard swallowed hard. 3 hours ago, he had a crisis. He stopped breathing. I thought he was going to die in my arms. Oh my God. The paramedics managed to stabilize him, but they said his lungs are severely damaged. He needs specialized care. They're taking him to the hospital right now. Bernadette nodded. And the mold. Did you check under the bed? Richard closed his eyes. 2 days ago, I finally looked at the photos on your phone. And then, I looked under the bed. What did you see? Richard opened his eyes. Exactly what you told me I'd see. A carpet of black mold, covering the entire floor. I couldn't believe it. It had been there the whole time. All this time. I killing my grandson, and I didn't see it. No one saw it, sir. No one except someone who cleans floors for a living. Richard looked at her with something that Bernadette hadn't seen before in his eyes. Respect. True respect. How did you know? Bernadette sighed. I didn't know, sir. I smelled it. 40 years of cleaning houses teaches you to recognize the smell of dampness, of mold, of things that hide, where no one looks. Richard shook his head. I spent millions of dollars on the best doctors in the world. I ran 47 tests, and none of them thought to look under a bed. Because doctors look for diseases inside the body, sir, not in the environment, not in the obvious places, not where a simple housekeeper would know to look. Richard took her hands. Come with me to the hospital, please. I want you to be there. When they wake little Johnny up. Bernadette nodded. Of course. And together, they got into the waiting ambulance. The hospital was a huge, cold building. Bernadette walked through its hallways, feeling like she didn't belong there, in her old dress, her worn shoes, her black skin, and her large body. But Richard didn't let go of her hand. He led her directly to the pediatric intensive care unit. There was little Johnny, lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes, paler than ever before, frailer than ever before, but alive, still alive. The doctors approached Richard. Mr. Miller, we need to speak with you. You can talk in front of her. She's family. Michelle felt something stir in her chest. Family. He had said family. The doctors exchanged glances. All right. We've analyzed the samples from the environment you sent us. The mold found under your grandson's bed is Stachybotrys chartarum. Toxic black mold. Richard nodded slowly. What does that mean for little Johnny? It means we've been treating the wrong symptoms for 8 months. The respiratory problems, the fatigue, the mental confusion. It was all caused by prolonged exposure to the mycotoxins from the mold. But he can recover, right? He can get better. The doctor sighed. It's too soon to know. The lung damage is significant. The next few days will be critical. What do you need? Tell me what you need and I'll get it. The only thing your grandson needs now, Mr. Miller, is time. Time away from the source of contamination. Time for his body to recover. Richard slumped into a chair. Michelle walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. He's going to be okay, sir. I just know it. How do you know that? Michelle looked at little Johnny in the bed. Because that boy is a fighter. He survived 8 months breathing poison. If he could handle that, he can handle anything. Richard looked up. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for leaving your cell phone. Thank you for forcing me to see what I didn't want to see. Don't thank me, sir. Thank God. And the nose of an old housekeeper. The next 3 days were the longest of Richard Miller's life. And Michelle's. Neither of them moved from the hospital. Richard had a bed installed for Michelle in little Johnny's room. He had food brought to her, clothes, everything she needed. But Michelle didn't need any of that. She just needed to be there, watching over the boy while praying for him, waiting for the moment he would open his eyes. On the 4th day, at 6 in the morning, Michelle was dozing in her chair by little Johnny's bed when she felt something, a small hand touching hers. She opened her eyes with a start and saw little Johnny looking at her. His eyes were no longer glazed over or dull. They were clear, bright, alive. "Hi," the boy whispered. Michelle felt her heart explode with joy. "Hi, sweetie. How are you feeling?" Little Johnny thought for a moment before answering. "Better. I can breathe. My head doesn't hurt anymore." Tears began to stream down Michelle's cheeks. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you." "Why are you crying?" little Johnny asked. "Because I'm happy, sweetie. I'm so happy." The boy smiled. A weak smile, but a smile nonetheless. The first real smile Michelle had seen on his face since she arrived at the mansion. "You saved me," little Johnny said. "No, sweetie, you saved yourself. I just looked where no one else was looking." "Under the bed," Michelle nodded. "Under the bed. Why didn't anyone else look there?" Michelle thought for a moment before answering. "Because people with degrees and diplomas sometimes forget to look at the obvious, sweetie. Sometimes they're so busy looking for complicated things that they don't see the simple ones. But you see them. I clean floors, sweetie. When you spend your life on your knees, you learn to see things that people standing up don't." Little Johnny squeezed her hand. "Thank you," he whispered. And Michelle knew that thank you was worth more than any amount of money Richard could pay her. Worth more than any recognition. Worth more than anything in the world. Because it was the thank you of a child who was alive, thanks to her. If you're listening to this and you still believe that humble people can't change the world, let me tell you what happened next. Little Johnny recovered. Not immediately. It wasn't an instant miracle. It took weeks of treatment, months of pulmonary rehabilitation, a full year of medical follow-up. But he recovered. His lungs healed. His energy returned. His smile came back. And all because a 67-year-old housekeeper decided that she smelled something funny in a luxury bedroom. Richard Miller changed. Not just a little. He changed completely. He sold the mansion where his grandson had almost died. He bought a smaller house with no dampness, no secrets under the beds. He sued the construction company that had remodeled the room without revealing the moisture problem. He won millions in the lawsuit. He donated all that money to a fund for families affected by environmental illnesses. And Michelle. Michelle. Richard offered her a job as a housekeeper in his new house. Michelle turned down the offer, not because she was offended, not because she held a grudge, simply because she didn't want to clean floors anymore. She was 67 years old. She had cleaned enough houses in her life. It was time to rest. Richard understood. And then he offered her something else. "I want you to be little Johnny's grandmother," he said. "Not an employee. Not a nanny. A grandmother. Part of the family. Forever." Michelle looked at him uncomprehending. "I don't understand, sir." "Little Johnny doesn't have a grandmother. His other grandmother died years ago, and you saved his life. If there's anyone who deserves that title, it's you." Michelle was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. "Okay, sir. I'll be his grandmother. But on one condition." "What is it?" "That you call me Shelley. Not Miss Michelle. Just Shelley. Like my real grandkids used to call me." Richard smiled. "Deal." It's been 2 years since that night when Richard called Michelle crying. Little Johnny is 9 years old now. He's a completely different child from the pale ghost Michelle met in that luxury room. He runs, he plays, he laughs, he goes to school. He has friends. He dreams of being a soccer player. And every Sunday, without fail, he goes to visit his grandma Shelley. That's what he calls her. Grandma Shelley, the woman who saved him by looking where no one else was looking. Michelle now lives in a small apartment that Richard bought for her. It's not luxurious. It doesn't have imported furniture or expensive hardwood floors. But it's hers. For the first time in her life, she has something that is completely hers. And she has something else. She has a framed photo on her nightstand. A photo of little Johnny and her taken the day he left the hospital. He's smiling. She's crying. Underneath the photo is a phrase handwritten by little Johnny himself. For my grandma Shelley. The only person who looked under my bed. Love you forever. Richard also changed in other ways. She created a foundation. She called it the Benedita Institute. Eyes that see. Its mission? To educate doctors, architects, and builders about the dangers of environmental illnesses, about the importance of checking not only patients' bodies, but also the spaces where they live. Each year, the Institute trains hundreds of professionals. Each year, those professionals detect dozens of cases of illnesses caused by mold, lead, asbestos, and other hidden toxins. Each year, children are saved because someone learned to look where no one else was looking. All thanks to a housekeeper who smelled things that doctors couldn't see. Benedita was invited to give a talk at the Institute's launch. She didn't want to go. She said she didn't know how to speak in public, that she didn't have anything important to say, that she was just an old woman who cleaned floors. Richard insisted. And finally, Benedita agreed. She stood before a room filled with doctors, engineers, business executives, and journalists. She wore her best dress, the only one that wasn't her work uniform. And she said something that no one in that room would ever forget. Good morning. My name is Benedita. I'm 69 years old. I never went to college. I never got a degree. I've spent 40 years of my life cleaning the houses of rich people. She paused. And 2 years ago, I saved the life of a 7-year-old boy who was dying in one of those houses. I saved him because I looked under his bed. Something that 14 doctors with diplomas and 47 tests with million-dollar machines hadn't thought to do. The room was completely silent. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm not telling you this to humiliate you. I'm telling you this so you understand something very simple. Benedita looked at the doctors in the audience. Wisdom doesn't come from degrees. It comes from experience. It comes from spending your life observing. It comes from being on your knees, close to the floors, where things are hidden. She paused again. You are brilliant doctors, talented engineers, successful business people, but sometimes the brightest people are the ones who see the least, because they're so busy looking up that they forget to look down. She pointed to the floor beneath her feet. That's where secrets live. That's where illnesses hide. That's where it's sometimes. The answer that everyone is looking for is, Count Benedita smiled. So, the next time you can't diagnose a patient, the next time the tests show nothing, the next time medicine has no answers, do what a housekeeper does. Look under the bed. The room erupted in applause, and Benedita, for the first time in her life, felt that everything she had lived through, everything she had suffered, everything she had lost, finally had a purpose. This story isn't about mold. It's not about doctors who failed. It's not about millionaires who learn lessons. This story is about something simpler. It's about the importance of looking. Really looking. Not just with your eyes, but with all your senses. With your sense of smell, with your sense of touch, with your intuition. Benedita didn't save little Johnny because she was smarter than the doctors. She saved him because she looked differently. She saved him because she had spent her life cleaning up what others dirtied, observing what others ignored, paying attention to details that everyone overlooked. She saved him because she was a housekeeper. And sometimes, the people who clean our floors can see things that we, from our height, will never see. If this story made you feel something, let me ask you a question. Who is the Benedita in your life? Who is that humble person, without degrees, without recognition, who sometimes sees things that you can't see? It might be the woman who cleans your office. It might be the doorman in your building. It might be your grandma who never went to school. It could be anyone. The question is, are you listening to them? because the next Benedita might be trying to tell you something important, and if you don't pay attention, it might be too late. The last time Benedita saw little Johnny was a week ago. The boy came running to her apartment, like he always does. He hugged her with those arms that, 2 years ago, didn't even have the strength to lift themselves. "Grandma Benet," he said with that smile that lights up the whole room. "Guess what my teacher told me today?" "What did she say?" "My love. She said that when I grow up, I can be anything I want, that I have my whole life ahead of me." Benedita felt tears welling up, but she held them back. "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" Little Johnny looked at her seriously. "I want to be like you, Grandma. I want to help people. I want to see things that no one else sees." Benedita couldn't hold back the tears this time. She hugged him with all her strength and whispered something that only he could hear. "You're already like me, my love. You already see things that no one else sees. Just promise me that you'll never stop looking." "I promise." Grandma and Benedita knew, in that moment, that everything had been worth it. The 4 decades cleaning floors, the death of her grandson Matthias, that never stopped hurting. Richard's rejection, that almost made her give up. The nights crying alone in her small apartment. Everything had been to get to this moment, to save this boy, to become his grandmother, to teach him that the most important people in the world aren't the ones with degrees. They're the ones who look, really look, downward, where no one else looks. And you, what are you looking at? And what are you failing to see? Because there, right beneath something you pass by every day, might be the answer you've been searching for years. You just have to kneel down and look. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about the humble people who have changed your life, consider supporting this content. Every contribution helps us continue to tell stories like this. Stories of invisible people who do extraordinary things. Stories that remind us that true power isn't in money or titles. It's in the eyes that see, and in the hearts that dare to speak, even when no one wants to listen. Because sometimes, a single person who insists on telling the truth can save a life. Benedita did it, and you can do it too. You just have to look. Thank you for listening. And remember, the next time you see someone cleaning a floor, remember that that person might know things that you don't know. They might see things that you don't see. They might save you from something you don't even know is killing you. You just have to listen to them and look where they tell you to look, even if it's under your own bed.